Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, March 3rd, 2022. A bipartisan group of U.S. senators and House members seeking to end Russian oil imports to the U.S. as the ultimate sanction for Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. But the White House continues to say President Biden will not support such a ban for fear that it would cause gas prices to go even higher. President today announcing new sanctions against Russian oligarchs and their families at the start of a cabinet meeting at the White House that also focused on the economy and his domestic agenda. Also today, White House sending an emergency spending request to Capitol Hill for aid to Ukraine and also combating COVID-19 here in the United States. More U.S. senators meeting with Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, with a hearing starting just over 2 weeks away. And the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who met with the nominee on Wednesday, talking today about how it went. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked about the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in a court filing last night, claiming that former President Donald Trump engaged in a criminal conspiracy against the U.S., trying to overturn the 2020 election results. This from the Wall Street Journal. Lawmakers of both parties in recent days have called for a ban on Russian oil imports in response to Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Biden administration officials have so far largely avoided widespread sanctions on Russia's energy sector, fearing they would result in price increases. When asked about banning Russian oil, Mr. Biden said earlier this week that all options are on the table. Biden administration is weighing options to cut U.S. dependence on Russian oil without disrupting global supply, according to administration officials, some reporting from the Wall Street Journal. On Capitol Hill, there was a news conference with U.S. senators and U.S. House members from both parties, Republicans and Democrats, introducing legislation to cut off Russian oil imports. The chief Senate sponsors are Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a Democrat, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, a Republican. Here's Senator Manchin.
First of all, let me just say this to all of my colleagues. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of us coming together. And basically, we're coming together out of the support of Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is absolutely the carnage we see going on. Innocent, peace-loving people being attacked viciously by Russia, by Putin's Russia. Let's put it very clearly, Putin's Russia. And we have to do everything we can to support them. I was very proud of the president when he said that basically there won't be 1 inch of NATO land that we will not defend. That's a strong statement, and I feel very strongly about that. And I think showing the support that we have and united about this, we will. But one, what we can make no mistake. This is energy has become a weapon of war for Putin, and he's using that as a weapon of war. He's using it against all of Europe, if you will. But Ukraine is basically the catalyst of what he's doing. So what we're doing today is we introduced a bill. It's been dropped. We have, I think there's 18 of us, 9 Ds and 9 Rs, that are on this piece of legislation that basically bans the Russian Energy Imports Act. That's all it is. We're banning Russian Imports Act. What we're banning is basically petroleum products, crude oil, LNG, coal, mostly all fossils coming into the United States and whatever they should be.
Senator Joe Manchin at today's news conference on Capitol Hill, and the main Republican sponsor of the bill, Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska.
Senator Manchin has used the words, Putin is not afraid to weaponize energy. He's been doing that. We've seen it all along into this lead up. And there's been an approach and a policy from this administration that says we don't want to do that. We don't want to put that on the table. Well, I'm sorry, sir. It's already on the table, and it's been put on the table by Putin. And so what can we do to respond? Well, I will tell you today, our message should be pretty clear and pretty simple. No more Russian energy should come into the United States for the duration of this bloody, horrifying, and unprovoked war against Ukraine. So this measure is in direct response to what Russia is doing with the bombing of the schools and the hospitals and the apartment buildings, forcing the Ukrainians to flee their country, killing the innocents that remain, and using some of the worst weapons in the world and indiscriminately to do it. So these are not just acts of war, they're war crimes. And there should not be a single additional American dollar allowed to finance these atrocities. So the president has said, I'm going to use every tool in the toolbox. Mr. President, this is a tool. This is a tool. The one tool that might just force Vladimir Putin to sue for peace here.
Senator Lisa Murkowski at today's news conference with other senators and House members, both Republicans and Democrats. More from the Wall Street Journal article. Russia is the world's third largest oil producer, responsible for more than 10% of global supply, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Its exports account for 7% of the world market, and many analysts expect at least some of that to get disrupted as the conflict continues. About 8% of U.S. imports of oil and refined products, or about 672,000 barrels a day, come from Russia. The U.S. buys Russian oil in part to feed refineries that need different grades of crude with a higher sulfur content to make fuel at top capacities. In recent years, Russian crude has filled some of the gap around the world left behind by sanctions on Venezuela and Iran. Some of the reporting from the Wall Street Journal. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked at her news conference today what she thinks of banning Russian oil.
Pushed by some Democrats to ban the import of Russian oil, and I believe that Senators Manchin and Murkowski are going to put forth a bill on that today. Where do you stand?
I'm all for that. Ban it.
Ban the oil,
Ban
the
the oil
Russian oil
coming from
import.
Russia. Yeah.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, with reporters on Capitol Hill. At the White House, the Press Secretary Jen Psaki defending the Biden administration's position not to end Russian oil imports at this point to prevent energy price increases.
I wanted to ask about oil prices.
Sure.
They're already at about $111 or so a barrel. Pelosi has come out also in support of banning Russian oil. So why keep the carve out? Especially when oil, with the argument that Putin is going to not benefit from oil. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I think I do know what you're trying to say. Well, our objective and the president's objective has been to maximize impact on President Putin and Russia while minimizing impact to us and our allies and partners. And I know you've heard me say this a few times before, but we don't have a strategic interest in reducing the global supply of energy. And that would raise prices at the gas pump for the American people around the world because it would reduce the supply available. And it's as simple as less supply raises prices. And that is certainly a big factor for the president in this at this moment. It also has the potential to pad the pockets of President Putin, which is exactly what we are not trying to do. So as the president has said, we carved out payments for energy, trade, and transport from our financial sectors sanctions with that in mind. I would also note that we have been taking steps to degrade Russia's status as a leading energy supplier over time. That includes, of course, shutting down Nord Stream 2 or preventing Nord Stream 2 from operating. That's why we're surging LNG to Europe to help accelerate its diversification from Russian gas. And I think you've also seen European leaders talk about the need to reduce their reliance and to diversify. And we are continuing to look at other options we could take right now to cut U.S. consumption of Russian energy. I mean, for us, if you look at publicly available data, it's only about 10% of our imports. But again, reducing the supply out there would have an impact on prices and on prices at the gas pump.
I guess the question is, if oil is already so expensive, isn't he already benefiting from from an already costly price of oil? How does he stand to benefit if you continue to allow that?
If it reduces further, it makes it more expensive. So I think we look at it through that prism.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki with reporters in the White House briefing room. Germany's economy minister telling reporters today in Germany, I would not support an embargo on imports of fossil fuels from Russia. I would even speak out against it because we would threaten the social peace in the republic with that. The minister is saying that his country needs to free itself from imports of Russian energy, but that's going to take time. Germany gets about half of its coal and gas from Russia and a third of its oil. Back in the U.S., Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, introducing his own bill to ban Russian oil imports to the U.S. He says today on the Senate floor that he wants to deprive Russia of oil profits to fund the war against Ukraine, but he doesn't want to increase oil production in the U.S. or anywhere else to make up the difference.
Oil profits are the engine of Russia's economy, and natural gas is the geopolitical weapon it wields to threaten Europe's energy security. Nearly 40% of Russia's entire revenue is derived from oil and gas exports. Russia's tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery are funded by dirty fossil fuels purchased by other countries, including the United States of America. We are part of the funding of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine. We import oil from Russia. That oil goes to Putin and his cronies. We have a moral moment here to provide all possible humanitarian aid to the Ukrainian people. We have a moral moment here to cut off the money pipeline that is funding the missiles and the tanks that are destroying the homes of the Ukrainian people. And we have a moral moment here to reject the bad faith arguments that are using this horrifying invasion to push for more drilling and money to fossil fuel companies. More lands and waters lost to extraction of oil and gas, and more profit for big oil at the expense of American pocketbooks, as our consumers are tipped upside down at the gasoline pumps all across our country, shaking money out of those pockets and sending it to big oil and sending it to Russia.
Senator Ed Markey on the Senate floor. Even without a formal U.S. ban on Russian oil imports, BBC News reports that traders are struggling to sell Russian oil, even at a discount, because of the new difficulties in shipping and payments amid the invasion of Ukraine. Nearly 70% of Russian crude oil exports don't have a buyer. A Russian consultancy firm, Energy Aspects, said that, according to BBC News. The U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell asked today about the possible long-term implications of the Russian war on Ukraine, on oil prices and inflation. He testified before the Senate Banking Committee. Here are questions from Senator Kirsten Sinema, Democrat from Arizona.
As you know, over the last 2 years, we've seen the significant impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our global supply chains for both industrial and consumer goods. While our economy is beginning to recover, we are already seeing the impact that Vladimir Putin's illegal, violent attack on Ukraine will have on the price of oil and gas here at home. I'm supportive of the strong, swift actions the administration has taken to sanction major Russian banks and Russian oligarchs in response to the unprovoked war that Russia is waging against Ukraine. I can believe we can go farther and do more. I'm also mindful of the impact that these sanctions are having and will continue to have on everyday people, not just in Russia and Ukraine, but also here at home. These sanctions can affect the availability and pricing of essential goods for hardworking Arizona families by further disrupting global supply chains. Let me be clear, Arizonans stand with Ukraine in their fight to determine their destiny. We are supportive of the actions taken thus far to hold Russia accountable. And Arizonans are also concerned with the price of groceries and everyday goods, and we're paying too much at the pump right now. So in a global economy, sanctions often involve economic trade-offs. How is the Fed assessing the impact of Russia's illegal war and the U.S. and allied sanctions against Russian banks on the pricing of oil and gas for consumers?
Thank you. So oil and gas prices have been going up really for a couple of months now in anticipation of this, and then they've gone up substantially in the last couple of weeks. And, you know, the really important question for the economy is how long that will persist. The immediate impact will be to raise gas prices and other fuel prices and prices for companies using energy. You know, so inflation will move up. People will feel that, certainly at the gas pump. And also, you know, crudely, a little bit, you would expect at least a little bit of you know, lower economic activity due to higher energy prices. But again, it's both the magnitude of that full, and that will really depend on events that haven't happened yet. How big will those increases be? And secondly, how long do they persist? If they are brief and go away, or if just the price of oil stays at a certain level for a while, then the effect on inflation will be temporary. So we'll be watching all of those things, and we run simulations and that sort of thing. That's one of the things we like to do, and so to make ourselves think about the possibilities. Of course, everything is so uncertain. It's just very hard to say where this is going, and I think in that environment we need to move carefully with our policy, and that's what we're planning to do.
How much do you expect these changes in oil and gas prices to affect the availability and pricing of other goods that rely on oil and gas in the U.S.? And do you expect there to be a noticeable impact in the consumer price index?
I think temporarily, you'll see gas prices move up as they do when oil prices go up, and that'll show up in the consumer price index. It'll show up in the headline index. It doesn't show up in the core index, but it shows up in the headline index. And the headline index, of course, is what people are actually paying at any given time. So it will show up.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testifying before the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, questioned by Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Technically, he is chair pro tempore, or acting chair. His first term has expired. His nomination for a second term has not yet been approved by the full Senate. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 96, NASDAQ down 214, S&P down 23. Labor Department saying new weekly claims for unemployment benefits in the United States fell last week by 18,000 to 215,000. New jobless claims have fallen in 5 of the past 6 years. CNBC has this. J.P. Morgan said Thursday it expects Russia's economy will come to a virtual halt due to global sanctions against the country for its invasion of Ukraine. Wall Street firm expects Russia's gross domestic product to contract by 35% in the second quarter of 2022 and 7% for the full year. Some other headlines today on the Russia's war in Ukraine from the Associated Press. The French President Emmanuel Macron saying that he has again asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to halt attacks in Ukraine, but that Putin won't do it. Macron tweeting, at this point, he refuses. A Ukrainian official who attended talks with Russians that said that, regrettably, we haven't reached results we were hoping for, but emphasized the importance of humanitarian corridors, saying that many cities have been besieged by the Russian troops and are experiencing a dramatic shortage of food and medicines. U.S. officials saying Russia has fired 480 missiles at Ukraine as Russian troops make more progress in the south but are largely stalled in the north. Samantha Power is administrator of USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development. She's just back from the Polish-Ukrainian border, one of the transit points for all the refugees fleeing Ukraine. Samantha Power speaking today at a program hosted by the German Marshall Fund.
Our emphasis as a U.S. government working through our UN partners and the ICRC and others is, to continue to smooth the process by which people can leave the country, to make sure that the frontline states, this is the State Department's Population, Refugees, and Migration Bureau does great work in this, working with UNHCR, but mainly the governments in the region to make sure that there is a welcome there, not only hot meals, when they first arrive, but an onward, a place to spend the night, drawing on diaspora networks, drawing on the outpouring that we've seen all around the world. And again, it was very inspiring to see citizens from, and I've read about some of them, I saw some of it, but just becoming kind of amateur Uber drivers, free Uber drivers, just deciding suddenly to become de facto taxi drivers, going to the border, asking people where they wanted to go, whether they could help. And we can just only hope as the flow increases, as it might, that generosity persists. But as the Kharkiv testimonial that you offered indicates, the burning humanitarian needs are inside Ukraine. And getting food into dangerous areas, into violent areas is very challenging. We have the World Food Program rolling its trucks now across the border, stockpiles being amassed, and using train networks, road networks, everything we can. And then again, ensuring that access is granted. The big issue of modern conflict, as you know, in places like Syria, Yemen, elsewhere, and Ethiopia, most dramatically, is access. Is just, authorities deny those who have a monopoly on violence in a particular area or have a military advantage, denying humanitarian access. And so that cannot happen in this instance. And the UN is very, very focused on making sure that it can negotiate access to be able to evacuate civilians from those towns that are under siege and to be able to flow in humanitarian assistance and medical supplies along the lines of what is needed, not only in Kharkiv, but in Mariupol, in Kyiv, and in cities that are under siege in this grotesque and unjustified invasion of Ukraine.
Samantha Power is administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and she was at an event hosted by the German Marshall Fund today. White House requested $10 billion in emergency spending for Ukraine's humanitarian needs and military defense. Also today, the Pentagon establishing a channel of direct communication with the Russian Ministry of Defense. An official telling the Associated Press it is a deconfliction line for the purpose of preventing miscalculation, military incidents, and escalation. And the European Union today granting temporary protection and residency permits for all the refugees coming from Ukraine, speeding up a process that refugees from other war-torn areas have found could take months or years. There are 27 nations in the EU. So far, it's estimated about 1 million Ukrainians have left, and that could rise as the conflict continues. Washington Today continues in a minute.
Sunday on Q&A, speechwriter Donna Rubin talks about the Speaking While Female Speech Bank, an online archive she created to preserve speeches by women that, in her opinion, have been unjustly overlooked or forgotten. The archive includes speeches by Queen Elizabeth II, Barbara Jordan, and Phyllis Schlafly.
It's only in very recent times that we've credited it all and paid attention to what women had to say. And we have an assumption, a large general cultural assumption, that women were not the best speakers, that women weren't speaking, that women were silenced. And in general, it's true women didn't speak as much as men for a variety of reasons, but it's not true that women weren't speaking. In fact, women have been speaking. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, but we just haven't had access to their words.
Donna Rubin, Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN's Q&A. You can listen to Q&A and all of our podcasts on our free C-SPAN Now app.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. President Joe Biden imposing new sanctions against 19 Russian oligarchs in President Vladimir Putin's inner circle, as well as dozens of the oligarchs' family members and close associates. It's the latest moves in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. President Biden making the announcement at the start of a cabinet meeting at the White House today. The president went on to talk about the economy and his domestic agenda following his State of the Union address earlier this week.
In the State of the Union address, I announced that the Department of Justice is going after the crimes of Russian oligarchs. The Attorney General spoke to that earlier, and who line their pockets with Russian people's money, and while Ukraine and the people are hiding in subways from missiles that are being fired indiscriminately in Russian cities. Today I'm announcing that we're adding dozens of names to the list, including one of Russia's wealthiest billionaires, and I'm banning travel to America by more than 50 Russian oligarchs, their families, and their close associates. And we're going to continue to support Ukrainian people with direct assistance. I had a meeting this morning with the quartet down in Southeast Asia, including India and Japan. And we're going to continue to support the people with direct assistance. And on Tuesday night at the Capitol, we saw America united in support of Ukraine. and in our work to hold Putin accountable. And now to today's meeting, we're going to discuss how we're going to keep the economy growing by bringing costs down for the American people, as well as we know that people are feeling the pinch. And we're going to do everything we can to make everyday things more accessible and more affordable for the American people. And we're also going to discuss the unity agenda I announced, and there was broad bipartisan agreement. Trying to end the opioid epidemic, ending cancer as we know it, providing support for veterans and mental health, especially for our children. The response, as you all know, because I've read your polls, have been overwhelming on all four of those issues, and because they're of great concern to the American people. And today, I have progress to announce on two of them. Just this morning, the House passed a bill to provide health care to veterans suffering from toxic exposure like burn pits. And 34 Republicans joined the Democrats to make bipartisan progress on this project, keeping our sacred obligation that we have to veterans who, when we send to war and they come home, we care for them. And when it comes to the mental health of our children, today I'm instructing the Departments of Education, Health and Human Services to develop initial guidance to schools that will help them provide mental health support for students in our schools. And this is going to include enabling schools to use Medicaid funds to deliver those important services. And because to me, the State of the Union was more than a speech to me. It was an action plan to lower costs, to address our critical needs, and as for the American people, because they're confused out there, understandably. The world is changing so rapidly. And we have a lot to cover in this meeting today, but I'm going to invite my friends in the press to depart in a minute. But the bottom line is, I meant what I said when I said I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic if we use the kind of ability to unite the country I think it exists, and I think we saw at the State of the Union. I don't think there's anything we can't do. I really don't.
President Joe Biden starting a cabinet meeting at the White House today. He mentioned that veterans' health benefits bill that passed the House and that 34 Republicans joined the Democrats. Final vote in the House, 256 to 174. But the bill that passed the House is different than one that passed unanimously in the Senate, so they will have to work that out. From the Washington Post, the Biden administration asking Congress to approve $32.5 billion to bolster Ukraine against Russian aggression and shore up the United States in the battle against the coronavirus, though early schisms emerged Thursday after Republicans repeated their objections to another round of pandemic aid. The Washington Post article goes on. The official request arrived as Democrats and Republicans continued to tussle over a broader aid package that many lawmakers hope to append to a still-forming deal to fund the government. Absent imminent action, critical federal agencies and programs are set to run out of money after March 11th, imperiling Washington's ability to respond to both crises in full. That from the Washington Post. Most of the emergency aid request, $22.5 billion out of the $32.5, is for COVID. And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking about that on the Senate floor today.
Mr. President, as spring begins, daily new cases of COVID-19 have dramatically decreased since the height of Omicron. Hospitalizations, thank God, are steadily declining. Across the country, Americans are able to remove their masks as the spread of disease seems to be lessening. Crucially, schools are open, and we need to do everything we can in our power to make sure they stay open. All of these signs point in a positive direction. The country is turning the corner on the COVID pandemic. We are in a new moment of the fight. But we are also at a crossroads. Either we act now to secure the progress we have made, or we risk backsliding if another contagious variant emerges in the fall and winter. Just as we cannot allow COVID to rule our lives, neither can we fall into a false sense of complacency. That's why the White House has requested that Congress include $22.5 billion in additional COVID relief funding in the upcoming spending bill. And Congress should follow through with this request over the coming days. If not, we risk sliding back if another variant occurs.
As the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. More from the Washington Post, writing 36 Republican senators told the White House on Wednesday that they may be unwilling to approve new coronavirus aid until they first learn how much money the U.S. government has already spent. The early warning arriving in a letter led by Senator Mitt Romney, Republican from Utah. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to supply chain shortages within the U.S. and inflation. Today, that was addressed at a Senate Commerce Committee hearing. Senator John Tester, Democrat from Montana, questioned the chair of the Federal Maritime Commission, Daniel Maffei, about goods coming into the United States and why then goods are not being exported.
So you got ships that come into our ports that dump off a lot of goods because the trade difference is still big. And then they leave our ports and they don't take anything on it, on their ship going back. Obviously, they're doing that because they can make more money.
Yes, they argue, because I share with you what you just said, and I do think it's fundamentally wrong. Even if it's not illegal, it's still fundamentally wrong to victimize small businesses and farmers. But what they will make the argument, or analysts will make the argument, that it's cost so much, the rate they make is so much more for an import in this time of huge demand.
Because we allow them to charge us more because we're the United States of America. This reminds me of prescription drugs. They allow us to charge us more, and so they're going to screw us not taking our products out. And there's nobody watching the shop here?
We are watching.
I know, but you don't have the authority to do what I just
let me clarify.
said.
I do want to clarify one thing, though, because, even I apologize for this, but somehow it was interpreted the other day as saying that the FMC has found no collusion. That is false. That is a false statement. And what I will say is we are looking at all of these reports, and any sort of wrongdoing, anything against the Shipping Act that we find, we are ready to investigate. We may already be investigating. I can't speak of particular cases, and that goes to the alliances and the individual carriers to the full extent of the law if the evidence is there.
Daniel Maffei is chair of the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, testifying before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. Questions from Senator John Tester, Democrat from Montana. You can find this full hearing and everything you hear on the C-SPAN networks archived at our website at cspan.org. Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson continuing her meetings on Capitol Hill with senators, including Republican Ben Sasse, Democrat Patrick Leahy, and Democrat Amy Klobuchar, all members of the Judiciary Committee. Here is the meeting with Senator Klobuchar.
Is this your first meeting in Dirksen office building? Very.
Yes,
how
thank you.
Good. Oh, yes. Well, that's very exciting. Very historic. I'm going to ask her like really tough questions, like, does she know about Minnesota fish houses and ice fishing? It's going to be really intense.
I've heard of ice fishing, actually. Although I'm from Florida. I was raised in Florida, so.
Well, it's a big deal in our state. So I'm excited to have the a judge here, not because I'm going to quiz her about ice fishing, but I just think that her experience is extraordinary. She has more experience as a judge than four of the people who are already on the Supreme Court. Not that we're keeping track. And we'll have one of two that have the most trial experience, which I think is very valuable to have that kind of practical experience for someone on the court. And I already was at one of her confirmation hearings and saw the kind of bipartisan support that she got, which I think is important. I also think it's really interesting to have someone with a background as a public defender and also have a brother who is a police officer and an uncle who is a police chief. And just as someone that's myself has worked in the justice system, I think having that kind of broad experience and those life experiences is very important. And I also love that she's like, has Paul Ryan as a family member, and he can vouch for her. So I don't know what else we need to know, really. So anyway,
thank you, Senator. Thank you for having me here.
I think we'll have a really good discussion, and I'm really honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. They're gonna. Thank you.
All right, let's go.
Thank you.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, with Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson in Klobuchar's office. The Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell met the nominee on Wednesday and today on the Senate floor talked about that meeting.
Yesterday morning, I hosted Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, the president.
Senate's in a quorum call.
Oh. I asked that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Yesterday morning, I hosted Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, the president's nominee to replace Justice Breyer on the Supreme Court, in my office. I was glad to meet with Judge Jackson. We enjoyed a cordial discussion. Like I've been saying, Republicans fundamentally believe the nominee, the court, and the country all deserve better than the disgraceful displays that Senate Democrats have routinely visited on nominees of Republican presidents. The Senate's process should be dignified, but it also must be vigorous, exhaustive, and painstaking. We're talking about a lifetime appointment to our nation's highest court. This is a moment when issues related to the law and the judiciary are directly hitting American families. From skyrocketing murders and carjackings to soft-on-crime prosecutors effectively repealing laws to open borders. This is also a moment when the far left has declared open season on the very concept of judicial independence itself. President Biden even bowed to the radicals and set up a court-packing commission. Now Justice Breyer has distinguished himself by loudly and proudly putting those radicals in their place. He's consistently denounced the concept of partisan court packing and defended the court's legitimacy. One would hope his successor would follow suit. But curiously, the same radicals who want to turn Democrats into the party of court packing also badly wanted Judge Jackson for this vacancy. It's a matter of record that this nominee was anointed favorite of these fringe groups. At this time last year, they were already spending dark money to raise her profile. So I intend to explore why groups that are waging political war against the court as an institution decided Judge Jackson was their special favorite. Like I said, I enjoyed meeting the judge. She's clearly a sharp lawyer with an impressive resume. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, a core qualification is judicial philosophy. Our citizens need justices who treat all parties fairly, apply our laws and Constitution as written, and leave legislating to us here in Congress. I raised all these matters yesterday, and I look forward to gaining more clarity about Judge Jackson's positions during the vigorous and thorough Senate process to come.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor. Supreme Court nomination hearings for Judge Jackson start March 21st. Story out of Louisville, Kentucky from the Associated Press. A former Kentucky police officer was found not guilty Thursday on charges he endangered neighbors the night he fired into Breonna Taylor's apartment during a botched drug raid that resulted in Taylor's death. A panel of 8 men and 4 women delivered its verdict about 3 hours after it took Brett Hankinson's case following closing arguments from prosecution and defense attorneys. None of the officers involved in the raid were charged with Taylor's death, and Hankinson did not fire any of the bullets that killed the 26-year-old black woman. Federal investigation into the shooting is ongoing, including a look at whether any officers violated Taylor's civil rights. That from Associated Press. The U.S. House's January 6th committee, writes CNN, laid out on Wednesday its most comprehensive view yet for how former President Donald Trump's conduct up to and during the insurrection may have amounted to a crime. Arguments came in a court filing where a key player in the conspiracy alleged by the committee is seeking to block some of the emails from being disclosed to House investigators. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked about all this today.
Obviously, the 1-6 committee had a filing last night. I know you don't want to talk directly about their work.
That's right.
But let me ask you. Obviously, you don't want to talk about their work, but that said, when you were on the dais on January 6th,
yes,
your security detail rushed you out.
Right.
Do you think that the threat was there, that they were trying to overturn the election, the mob outside the building? Because that's what's reflected in the filing today. What did you think was going on when that happened on January 6th?
Frankly, my concern was for the safety of my members, if you want to know what I was thinking. I was thinking about the safety of my members, the safety of our staff, the safety of the press who were covering us. So I was totally consumed, and I didn't want to leave because I was like, well, but again, that totally consumed my thoughts.
You didn't think this was a threat to the electoral college and the integrity of the election at that moment?
I thought it was a threat to our democracy, our Constitution, and the Capitol building, and all that entails. Jay?
That's House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at a news conference today. Politico writes that Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, member of the January 6th Select Panel, said he's concerned that the Justice Department has not yet taken potential crimes by former President Trump and his network seriously enough. He says that the Justice Department believes there is evidence of a crime involving anyone, including the former president, they should be investigating it. House Speaker Pelosi also asked about the heckling by two Republican members of Congress during President Biden's State of the Union address on Tuesday night. Those two, Lauren Boebert of Colorado and Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia.
On the last question, on the State of the Union, we did see numerous outbursts from Representatives Boebert and Greene during President Biden's speech. As I'm sure you probably remember, when Congressman Joe Wilson yelled "You lie" at President Obama in 2009, the House actually passed a resolution of disapproval on that. We haven't heard any talk of that now, but I'm wondering just what is your reaction to those outbursts? Should any action be taken, and what does it say about the House Representatives?
Let me just say this. I agree with what Senator Lindsey Graham said. Shut up. That's what he said to them. I think they should just shut up.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That heckling during the State of the Union address included Congresswoman Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene chanting "Build the Wall" when the president was talking about immigration reform. And when the president was talking about his son Beau dying of cancer and how Beau was among many veterans who had possibly suffered from toxic exposure injuries from military burn pits used in Iraq and Afghanistan, the president said a cancer that put them in a flag-draped coffin. Boebert yelling, "You put them in," 13 of them, referring to U.S. service members killed by an attack during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Nielsen ratings out today for the State of the Union address, 38.2 million TV viewers across 16 networks. That's about 1 million more than former President Donald Trump's last State of the Union speech in 2020. Senator Ben Ray Lujan, Democrat from New Mexico, returning to Washington, D.C. about a month after he suffered a stroke. He was welcomed to the Senate Commerce Committee by the chair, Senator Maria Cantwell, Democrat of Washington State.
Senator Lujan, so good to see you.
It's an absolute honor to be back, and Kirsten got me a little teary-eyed today. But to every one of you that sent me notes, that sent videos, and all the prayers, it worked. And it's good to be back. I'll tell you, I missed y'all. So look forward to getting to work, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Well, we love you, Ben Ray, and we're glad you're here with us today.
Senator Maria Cantwell, chair of the committee, and Senator Ben Ray Lujan. The committee today taking votes on 2 Federal Trade Commission nominees. The votes have been delayed when Lujan was recovering from that stroke, and it turns out his vote was needed. The nominees, Alvaro Bedoya and Gigi Sohn, tied 14-14 in the vote of senators, and that means that it's going to take extra legislative steps to get those nominees reported from committee to the full Senate, but they didn't fail, so they are still the nominations are still viable. Kenneth Duberstein, the final White House chief of staff to President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, has died at the age of 77. Axios writes that he was a consultant to The West Wing, the TV show, gregarious presence at Washington parties, in network green rooms, and in New York boardrooms, and forever beloved by the press for all the leaking he did during the Reagan years. In 2013, he was on a panel with other former White House chiefs of staff, an event covered by C-SPAN. Here's a clip where he talks about the difference between campaigning and governing.
I would suggest that the art of governing is much different from the art of campaigning. In the art of governing, you sometimes, as I said before, have to make nice with the people who oppose you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to not demonize the opposition. You need to get them on your side. You need to stand for some stuff and articulate it. Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. In campaigning, you're essentially demolishing your opponent. That's not building consensus. And if I were to give advice, I would say that there's an inside game, which is Washington, where the trust factor is minimum on both sides of the aisle. Today. But more fundamentally, you have to sell a consensus to America, not what is wrong with the opposition's arguments, but what you believe in and what you're willing to fight for. Whether it is immigration reform or a, quote, fair and balanced package, by saying more than fair and balanced, by arguing out some of these on what you believe and what you're willing to fight for, rather than saying, well, we'll leave it to the Congress to do something about it.
Kenneth Duberstein, former White House Chief of Staff to President Ronald Reagan, on a 2013 panel with other former White House Chiefs of Staff, an event hosted by the National Archives and the Aspen Institute, that from C-SPAN's video library. Ken Duberstein has died at the age of 77. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Democrat from New York and chair of the House Republican Conference, tweeting, "Heartbreaking news to learn of the passing of Washington icon, mentor, and friend to so very many, Ken Duberstein. The number of lives that Ken touched for the better is incalculable. His advice was always wise, sage, and heartfelt. As all who knew him understand, Ken is irreplaceable." That tweet from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can get more top Washington stories sent to you each day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. Just go to c-span.org/connect to subscribe. Have a good night.